Ciao,
and welcome back to the iMovie podcast.
This week, we are looking at, as usual, one of the top 250 rated films on Letterboxd. And this week, we're looking at the film that is currently in place 157, which is François Truffaut's The 400 Blows, or Les 400 Coups, which is came out in 1959 and is part of the French New Wave.
La Nouvelle Vague.
One of the early films of the French New Wave.
Not even the first-ish.
Les 400 Coups is a story, as usual. We'll give you a brief summary of the plot in case you haven't seen it, and then we'll play a clip for you to get into the right mood. Les 400 Coups is a story of a young boy, Antoine, who is probably in early secondary school. I think he's probably around 12, 13 years old. 13. And it's kind of a period of his life. He's going to school, he's interacting with his parents, he's interacting with friends, and he's living in Paris in the 1950s. And yeah, it's an interesting portrait.
A coming of age.
Yes, coming of age in a way, and also especially a portrayal of how difficult it was to be a child in those days.
I agree.
Here's a clip.
Tu sais, j'ai eu ton âge moi aussi. Vous oubliez toujours ça, les gosses. Moi aussi j'étais butée. Je ne voulais rien confier à mes parents. Je préférais tout écrire dans un journal. Personne ne l'a jamais lu. Un jour, je te le montrerai. Hein? Justement, à ton âge, j'étais en vacances. Je suis partie avec un jeune berger. C'était une amourette, on nous a vite rattrapés. Ma mère m'a fait promettre de ne plus jamais le revoir. Elle n'a rien dit à mon père. Alors j'ai beaucoup pleuré. Mais j'ai obéi. Parce qu'il faut toujours obéir à sa mère. On peut avoir des petits secrets tous les deux, hein?
I would open with something that you told me while we were watching it, which is, this is so French, the way in which children are treated. At least they were treated in the past. So, I was thinking, you as a French person also, you have more insights, both linguistically and of how you know about France, which I don't have access to. And I thought, okay, do you want to share some thoughts about the post-war France, which is trying to rebuild, I guess, an economy and a certain education and maybe new manners to be in society. And I don't know, also, what do you see that you think this is so French, besides the cigarettes that they're smoking every 3 seconds?
Many things, especially in the classroom context, in which, I mean, obviously the world changed between the 1950s and when I went to middle school, but many of the methods of punishment are still similar, especially the standing in the corner and these things. I think that the feeling that Antoine has of somehow wanting to learn, because he is interested. I think it's Honoré de Balzac that he develops a passion for, but also being restricted by the extremely bureaucratic nature of the French scholastic system is something that is extremely relatable. I think if you went through that extremely bureaucratic system.
What also kind of struck me was, and due to the harshness of the parents, but at the same time, how much Antoine wanted to reproduce some of their gesture and of their, adulthood, which he was trying to reach. Also through disobedience and through rebellion to a certain rigid system, yes, as you said, based on punishment in the end, which is never the key.
And also, I think it's nice, the way in which the parents are shown is nice in this film, because it's... they are not cartoonishly evil. They even have some moments of having quite wholesome moments with Antoine. When they go to the cinema or when the dad spends some time alone with him. But overall, both of his parents are very bad at educating children.
Yeah, because the father maybe seems a bit nicer, but he's still the one who decides over everything, and he's still... I'm sorry, but lacking of knowledge on education and on how children are, how is their world. He's a bit of a child himself, I believe. He needs people to tell him what to do and how to find out things, and he's a bit classic, I think, also man who is used to have the power without questioning it. While the mom is kind of the opposite in a certain way, although she's also very superficial and... definitely harsh and horrible with the child.
My God, yes, really.
And not able to deal with her own issues. And that she not only reflects, but she throws at Antoine. Also in the eyes of the father, who is very naive, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think it's also quite interesting how often the mother is shown in this type of kind of realist film to be the softer of the two parents, but in this case it's arguably the father. In fact, the mother is extremely harsh and extremely cruel, and kind of also very immoral, because she also tries to kind of bribe him for not revealing her adultery to his father.
One thing that I thought too is that it's a comparison with another beautiful film called The White Ribbon by Michael Haneke.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I mentioned it during the film, because this harshness of parents on their children and on children in general, and their inability to educate, is the same that is in The White Ribbon, and it's the same that, as in The White Ribbon, then what you learn is that these children that have had just punishment and humiliation as an education, they end up being the future Nazis. And in this case, these children are the ones who then will have to face adulthood without the tools to be proper adults and reflect on themselves and learn about their mistakes, or how to, be nice and obtain things with kindness, without also perceiving themselves as failure, which I think is something that most likely Antoine really feels. Everything he does ends up not being right, although he's trying to be nice in many cases. And then the only way that he has to obtain a bit of attention is just to misbehave according to the standards, of course. I mean, sometimes he's just trying to be a child, as he should be. Then what is left is that you just hate yourself, you don't think you have any ability. You end up, in prison as an adult, but you're not an adult, and in that moment you don't need to be in prison. You need to learn about the world. And then what do? You escape and you try to find your freedom. But how can you find your freedom if I don't know, inside you're not.
It's difficult. And so this Antoine, played by Jean-Pierre Léaud, the central character, who's a young boy, is supposedly a semi-autobiographical representation of Truffaut, which I think is continued in other films of his, which also feature the same main actor, which, to be honest, we should watch to be able to properly see this story as a whole.
We will.
What did you think about stylistically very impressive film? It uses many techniques which are, safe to say, ahead of its time. It uses a lot of voiceovers, where the character's thoughts are played over what we see on screen.
And it's very well made.
It also has a lot of very impressive sequences. For example, the sequence where they go to the fairground and the camera spins round, or even a long camera shot that shows the kids walking across town on a kind of school trip to go to play football, and they kind of lose a lot of stragglers in different places. It's technically very brilliant.
It's true.
And it is a new way film because it tries to tell a different type of story. It's not classical at all. It's very critical of a patriarchal system, very critical of many norms in education as well. And I think that also, it tells a story from the point of view of a child about how unfair the treatment of a child is. And I think those things are definitely going against the establishment of what was accepted in France at the time.
I agree. And even more, it's not even a child, because somehow a child, he has that kind of pureness, but he's an older child. He's a puberty pre-teenager, which I think it's harder to represent, because usually they're a bit easy to dislike, because it's the face of stupidity and not being either of the two, and you start to have your own personality, which is not like pure and genuine, is more corrupted, if you want, or more you're stealing from everything. You're trying to experiment with who you want to be, and you absorb a lot, but also you're starting to respond, to attack back. So you're not always adorable and lovely, which I think then it's another interesting factor in the place in this film, is the choice of the age. And going back to the fair, like the wheel, with those beautiful shots. Also some shots that, to be honest, reminded me of La Haine a lot. I think La Haine used some of these techniques, and I understand why. But that playground something, I thought, playground? Is this a torture place? I'm sorry, that was horrible. Really like a nightmare. And I would feel like I would puke immediately. And as much as at the beginning he can find it funny, I think in some moments he also wasn't feeling the greatest. But at that age especially, and maybe especially because you're a male, you have to prove that you're strong enough and you're tough enough. And so that's also something that I think could be there.
And also you see the extent of like some things which are just crazy, like some cultural points, like the amount of cigarettes kids were smoking and cigars and drinking whole bottles of wine, and that's just, I mean, these kids were 12, 13 years old, maybe. It's crazy.
It's really
crazy.
Yeah, because of course also you play to be an adult. And they expect you to be an adult on so many levels, so why shouldn't you also have the privileges, or what is sold as privilege, and not just torture? Yeah. When I asked you about the French culture, is because one thing that came out also while we were watching it, for me, is that I thought these could never be Italian. In one scene, when they are all at a dinner table, and the mom doesn't get up to bring in the food and everything. It's the child who has to do that. In Italy, especially if the child is a male, that's not a possibility. Even now, I think it's very rare. The mom is always the one who gets up and does the things. She's the queen of the kitchen, and she's the one who has to feed and take care of other people. Maybe the female child, but not the male child. Even now, it's not as rigid and strict, but that's often the case. So I thought, okay, this is maybe in a certain way, it's an aspect in which France is a bit more advanced.
Well, it depends, because also I think the treatment of the child is very far from being advanced. But yeah, I think also being set in Paris and probably for the 1950s, so it's quite a modern city and with quite some modern standards when it comes to some things. Also because, of course, women were working a lot in the wartime period, and therefore there was continuation of women being working or being in professional capacity after the war, which I think is also a big part of that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely. Also, that she was smoking like a chimney too. She was very free in the end. She had her own agency, even when she was a spoiler, I guess, cheating on her husband. She was really free also in that cheating, and she didn't come out, and she had the power over the child. So, what about the friend René?
I like his kind of nomadic lifestyle and strange parental situation. I don't think it's necessarily advisable to raise your children in that way, but I think for Antoine it made a nice change of scenery.
Yeah, because he's the only person who is close for real to Antoine is actually another child, his friend of his in the same age. The only people that he can trust are not even people. One friend he can trust is his friend of his age, with whom also he goes to the cinema, which I think is an important part, maybe.
Yes, very much.
And I thought that was very beautiful too.
Recently, we watched for the first time Bicycle Thieves, which we'll also be doing an episode on soon. How would you say that? And it's set roughly in the same time period as probably Bicycle Thieves 10 years before. How does Italy compare to France in that period, based on these two films we've seen recently?
Okay. But first of all, let's say Bicycle Thief actually was in Rome, but it was in the 1950. I don't remember. Maybe 49 exactly. So it was super soon after the war. While this one is already 15 years. Let's say when it was made, maybe it was 14, 13. So it's a big difference already. I think in 10 years, many things can change. I think in the Italian representation, you can very much see the poverty, while in this one, maybe because it's also Paris, but to be honest, the other one was Rome. So you can see the taste of not only maybe a bourgeois, but also...
But they're not a rich family.
Exactly, but they're not, but they're trying to be for sure. It's more like the appeal of that and the possibility that the city is offering you to be, or the ideal that the city is offering you to be richer and with some cultural, I think the cultural appealing elements of you need to know about some things is very much there in France, or in this depiction of France at least, while in Italy it's more like you're trying to survive in the case of the Bicycle Thieves. But I think one theme that the Bicycle Thieves is very much showing is that morality that I think is so typical of Italy, that comes out as hypocrisy. I think Italy can be extremely hypocritical in the way they want you to be in a certain way, but of course you don't have the means, so they don't accept that to achieve the level that the society is telling you should achieve, you do maybe some things that are morally a bit corrupted, or I don't know. And in the case of Bicycle Thieves, to be honest, it is even just justifiable because it's just about surviving. But in general, it's very typical of Italy to have this morality that no, but we are people with certain standards, and the woman needs to be protected and everything. And then what they do is like they are destroying everything behind this facade of perfect behavior. And this, I'm saying an anecdote at this point, is super well represented by the performance that Marina Abramovic did in, I think, 1972 in Napoli, where we know that she's a bit brave with her performances, and she had this she was in this room with the audience in front of her, and she prepared a table with a few objects on it that they could use, the audience, as much as they wanted, in the way that they wanted, onto her / in general. And there were like some nice objects, if I'm not wrong, there was like a plumage of a bird, or some like nice and delicate objects, and then until the gun and some scissors and everything. And at the beginning, people were like, oh no, I can't touch her. Oh. And as soon as one person, a man if I'm not wrong, started to dare a bit more, and he like maybe took scissors and cut something, maybe her hair, I don't know, but something like goes a bit beyond, at that point then it was accepted that they could do the worst thing ever. To the point that one man, pointed the gun with the bullet in it at Marina. This is completely, I think, perfectly representing Italy. So it's this farce of being so beautiful and great, and I would never hurt anyone, and then actually what you're doing is, as soon as you have the possibility, you're doing the worst thing, and you become cruel, and you become obsessed with power. And I think that's very much there, and I think that what France does is actually showing you the power already in your face, and not being super careful about this facade, so that maybe this risk of becoming dangerous because you can't express what you actually feel inside maybe is a bit more, healthy. Although I think, as we often talk about, France and French people tend to be a bit more like, I'm the best, you can't reach me, or you have to beg to reach me, which I don't love.
But did you perceive that as a case in this film?
As a case in this film, a bit, yes. The mom. I was thinking a lot with the child, and a bit in general, her attitude is more like, because I'm a cool one, it's more my cigarettes, and you can see me and have the power, and I'm actually very, very cool and elegant, and I'm wonderful.
Well, there's a few things that are definitely present.
How did you perceive the sea at the end? Do you have some interpretations of what that wonderful landscape represented, both for the child and maybe in general?
Well, obviously, I mean, maybe he's never even been to the sea before, so for sure it's a new step, a new stage. It's a break from the urban landscapes that have dominated the majority of the film, and a stark contrast, because it's a barren, desolate landscape where, for once, maybe he finds himself a bit freer, a bit less oppressed by the noise, the constants, and the presence of all these people. And we've seen Paris as a very difficult place throughout the film, and at the end, finding this space is, very stark contrast to that, let's say. What about you?
See, yes, it's a bit of that, because I think the sea and the ocean, I don't know, in general can be very scary, and at the same time extremely attractive, and it's also showing you for how it is in the scene, like an infinite possibility of freedom, and at the same time it's an infinite possibility of trap you and inaccessible freedom, because the farther you go in the scene, the more possibilities of you to not survive are there. But at the same time, it can make you imagine and desire a life that is different from the one that you are condemned to. So yeah.
What do you think of the childhood psychology as shown in this film? In the scene in which a psychologist appears and asks questions to Antoine.
I don't remember too much that scene. That's something that's interesting, maybe. I see. See, when he's in the after the prison, no?
Yeah.
To be released. I don't remember
Not to be
the
released, but to be assessed. That's it.
The child was very like, yeah, maybe, I don't know.
Matter of fact. In
See,
general,
he was
the child
like,
isn't a traumatized child. He doesn't cry.
and besides, at some point he cried. I also thought he never cried. It's crazy.
Maybe once
And then
or
at some
twice.
point in prison he cried, and I thought, finally, you're showing
Maybe
me
in
your
that
child.
scene.
Maybe see. So I guess when he was going to prison and he was losing all the life that he had built or not built until that point. But it's true. He seems very, maybe even surrendered. And in fact, I wrote also that an adjective that adults used onto the children is delinquents. And I thought, how can you talk about a child like that? You're putting onto them a label that they're believing they are. And how can they be? I mean, they're like trying to communicate something. Please try to understand them, their language, not punish them or isolate them or label them in a way that then they will actually become criminals or whatever. Try to listen to them attentively. Sometimes I feel like the children in this film, and specifically Antoine, are actually more aware of some things in the world and on how they should be treated than adults. Like in the scene in the classroom when Antoine is clearly humiliated by the professors and maybe even president of head teacher. And it is his friend, I think it's actually René, who is defending him, and or another child. In any case, there is more like solidarity among children than, which is beautiful in general. I think it's how it should be. But then against the adults, because they recognize that the adults are not behaving in the way that is not even like the way that the children are taught to behave. They're going against their own teaching rules. So that's crazy. That's horrible. That's unfortunately very normal and normalized.
And what as we said, I think it's a product of the French New Wave. It's moving away from that style of teaching and that perception of the world that exists in this rigid and conservative like character of the teacher, the head teacher, and towards, questioning those things through psychology, through giving importance to children, and etc., etc.
I agree. Also, the comparison for you of the two post-Second World War films more than...
well, also, I think it's fair to say that it's a different situations. France is probably more of a flourishing economy at that time. And you can kind of sense that in the film. It still has issues, but it's a country in growth, whereas Italy is a country of stagnation. And those things are very present.
Yeah,
also.
Yeah. One is during the boom, basically, the beginning of the boom, at least, and the other one is like trying to rebuild what has been destroyed. But still, yeah, it's true. Do you think it had an impact on your perception of you as a child or as a parent? Do you think it's a film that you would... It's a film that had an impact on your perception of how you could be a parent or how children should?
I think hopefully I would have already known to avoid many of the mistakes made by the parents in this film. But I think it's also a nice film. I think it's because also it's a realist film. It's not exaggerated, I think, in that many things.
Yeah.
But also set in a very different context, so we're not necessarily used to. In the 1950s, when a lot of what was normal was very different to what it is now. And so from that point of view, I think it's also very interesting anthropologically to watch this film and to think about what's changed and what hasn't and stuff.
But so, do you think it could still be quite innovative in this sense? Maybe in the message that is sent in a certain way, or not anymore? So not that it has to be.
Yeah, I think for its form, absolutely.
Not for the content, but for the film.
But those things go hand in hand. You can't separate form from content when it comes to this aesthetic of cinema, I think. Because it's revolutionary via its form, and therefore its very form gives road to the context. For example, having the voiceover of the child, it's a stylistic choice, but also it's giving importance to the thoughts of the child. It, for example, even the focus of the film on the child's life and his life going to school and his frustrations with teachers is, again, a formal choice, but it's absolutely tied into the content. So I think those two things are inseparable, and in any case, yes, were very important at the time, and now give us a very different portrait and less idealized portrait of 1950s France.
That's true.
It was about whether you perceived it as a modern film.
Yeah, very much. Both in the styles and in the topic. And also that maybe ahead of its time.
So, Les Garçons Coups, where would you put it in your ranking? Would you have it in your top 250? Do you agree with it being number 157 in Letterboxd?
Honestly, I gave 4 stars, and I could maybe give 4.5. I couldn't give 3.5. I'd say 4 is the minimum. I wouldn't put it so high. It could easily stay in the top 250. I think it's also interesting because representing a country and a cinema wave that has been very relevant, and it still is very relevant. We still have to watch the Nouvelle Vague by Linklater though, and which I would like to see. And I don't know much about the Nouvelle Vague, so that's also something that I have to say yet. So for me, for now, it's a bit high rated maybe. Oh, I'm fine with it being a 157, but also a bit like lower, like 180 something could work. But then it's always the same topic that you make me think, how many films would you put higher? I don't know if there are that many that I would put higher, but for sure there are a few. Ecco. What about you?
No, yeah, I think I'm happy with its placement. I gave 4.5. I really enjoyed it. Maybe more than I thought I would. And yeah, I think it's a very interesting portrait of a different period of time.
Do you think that in like 50 years it would be placed much lower or much higher?
Probably lower, because there'll be more films that exist in that period.
50 years is so many in cinema, it's true. But because I thought also it's still very innovative.
It is.
So
and yes,
that would also say, because it's also very innovative in its collocation.
Truffaut, you impressed us.
C'est François. And then, yeah, I think we covered the whole thing. If you watched it, and maybe also if you have some readings to recommend that we never talk about actually, or some, of course, like perspective or interpretations of the sea, of childhood, of maybe also some technical, the parents, some technical also.
The way Paris is shown, films within films.
It's true. Why did they decide to steal a typewriter? Is that could be also relevant? Why is it the writing machine? And yeah, that's it. Don't forget to subscribe, please subscribe. And if you want to leave a comment, yes, you can like it if you liked it, and you can give feedback in a nice way if you have some issues. And see you for next video. And bye.
Bye.